to help project teams be better equipped to influence and challenge governance, and ultimately help them amplify their impact and their reach.
Being recognized for the work we were trying to do to make change globally out of Africa and out of the global south was part of what the Scale Up Award meant for us.
We've had a phenomenal year throughout the SCUP program, and I think the secret to kind of growing and scaling impact is collaboration.
To both project leaders and to experts, we ask them, please join us and get involved with the Scale program.
Good evening, dear participants here in the room for the last session at stage B of tonight. Thank you very much for being here. I'm trying to get some eye contact to realize whether it's working. Yeah, I'm getting eye contact, so that's excellent. Thank you so much. Welcome also to our online viewers. So just to, it's a good thing to remind everyone that this session is going to be, it's not live streamed, but it will be disseminated online. And a warm welcome to all my panelists. I had the pleasure to meet just in the last few minutes. So thank you very much for all being here. I hope you had a very good first day at the Paris Peace Forum, and we're very happy that you're with us at this late hour. So thank you so much. My name is Markus Herrmann. I'm a China analyst by profession, and I'm moderating this discussion today on behalf of Caixin Global, the official Chinese media partner of the Paris Peace Forum. I would like to say the proud official Chinese media partner. So this year's theme, I want to recap it. You've heard it across the sessions. Wanted a functioning global order will address the urgent needs for effective international governance in a world marked by great power rivalries, global instability, north-south distrust, and new transnational challenges. And I just want to add the data point that if you look through three key trade blocs, EU, US, and China, they all have mentioned, with the examples I'm going to give you, transition minerals as part of their industrial policy, or de-risking or security-related policy. So Jake Sullivan recently, and at his one-year speech on the US international economic policy, the Chinese third plenum in July added an unseen policy measure until then on wanting to coordinate the exploration of critical minerals, strategic minerals, how the Chinese label it, down to the commercialization. And finally, also the Draghi report in the EU context put a lot of emphasis on transition minerals. So there is a geopolitical backdrop to all the things that we'll be discussing. It's my pleasure now to introduce you the fellow panelists that I have. I want to stress that these panelists are practitioners in different fields, so I want to introduce them properly, what they do, and I will also give them a label that everyone is clear about what these different colleagues in this area are doing. So the first, to my left, I would like to introduce Bruno Oberle, the president of the World Resource Forum, the WRF, a non-profit organization for sharing knowledge about the economic, political, social, and environmental implications of global resource use, based in St. Gallen, Switzerland. Prior to leading WRF, Bruno was in private sector for 20 years. 15 years, the Swiss State Secretary for Environment and Director of the Swiss Federal Agency for Environment, 5 years as a professor for green economy, and 4 years as Director General of the IUCN. So the keywords for Bruno, I would suggest to you, is private and public governance between development and sustainability. Thank you very much, Bruno, for taking the time and being with us. On the left of Bruno is Louis Maréchal. He's a senior advisor in the minerals and extractives work of the OECD. Louis works in the OECD Center for Responsible Business Conduct, working on implementing the OECD due diligence guidelines for responsible supply chains of minerals from conflict-affected and high-risk areas. Prior to joining the OECD, Louis worked in the French MFA, on issues related to transparency and governance in the mining sector and security of supply of strategic minerals. And the keywords for Luis are risk management for companies and responsible investment in minerals. So very warm welcome for being here. To the left of Louis, we have Maha. Maha is an expert in global risk and future trends at the NYU's MA International Relations Program, and she's also a risk expert in the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council. As an author, she has written very interesting books, a trilogy of books including The Future World Order, even published in 2020, and then also an award-winning political comic book called The Global Kit, that I will look at for my own kids. So the keywords for Maha are international relations and also shock events. So thank you, Maha, for being with us. On the left of Maha, I would like to introduce Emily. It's a great pleasure to have you. Emily is the head of policy and EU relations for transition minerals at Global Witness. Global Witness is an international NGO established in 1993 to break links between natural resource exploitation, conflict, poverty, corruption, and human rights abuses worldwide, with offices in DC and London. Before joining GW, Emily had a career in policy advisory at the EU Parliament, policy shaping including the EU Green Deal, and legislation authoring including on supply chains. So Emily, responsible sourcing of transition minerals. Thank you for being here, Emily. On the left of Emily, we have Joel. Joel flew all the way here from South America. Thank you for being here. Joel is the CEO of Kimsa Ventures. Kimsa Ventures is a venture capital platform dedicated to investing in energy transition technologies and sustainable mining in Latin America. Joel combines strategic advisory and investment banking experience with focus on the lithium sector. And a recent example that I want to highlight is a case of a next-gen mining firm in Argentina committed to responsible practices and green technologies. Thank you very much, Joel, for being here. It's a pleasure. And then to the furthest, on the left side, we have Christoph. Christoph Kurz is the chief of party at Project Madini International at International Alert. International Alert is a global peace-building charity established in 1986. Madini qua Amani na Maendeleo, which means Minerals for Peace and Development project, aims to improve security, social cohesion and human rights in minerals-rich areas of Eastern DRC. Christoph is a peace-building and development researcher and practitioner with almost 20 years of experience managing projects, conducting research, and advising various institutions. So the keyword I would simplify for Christoph is about peace-building. So you have a stellar panel, practitioners in different fields, in different geographies, all linked to transition minerals. And I look forward to unpack the discussions that we will have together with this great panel. So what we will do in terms of sequence, I will ask my panelists each on one question. They will respond in about 3 to 4 minutes. And then in a second round, also to keep it more interactive, I will ask my panelists to react on a point made by another fellow co-panelist. And then we have some Q&A time, and I will invite you to join that. And then finally, we'll conclude on time so you can all head to your cocktails. So the first question I would like to throw to Bruno on my left here. Bruno, under the framing that I've introduced, in your view, what role should international bodies play in supporting or regulating the benefit-sharing arrangements between mineral-producing countries and global powers? How could you, and you can define these terms if you want, how could such regulation support sustainable development in the global south? Over to you, Bruno. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to you all to stay with us. As Marco said, we are the last panel between you and the cocktail, so please be patient, and we try to keep a bit of energy in the room. So, being the first one that speaks, I try to brush a bit the terminology that we will work about, that we will speak about. So, we want, on one side, we know demand is rocketing for all these metals. According to economical theory, price should go up too, and the sellers should be in the stronger position than before. Now, these have to be translated into concrete action. What it means, what can be achieved. So we want to increase benefits that the host country get from their extraction. Now, benefit can be employment, can be investments, can be royalties, but we should be honest with each other. It is not a huge benefit. It is the first step in using raw material, and it is only a tiny fraction of the global value added to mineral to our economies. So we have to be honest and realistic. Huh? The other part is maybe even more important. We would like to have more benefit, but we should also have less negative impacts. Negative impacts of mining are well known. The depletion of the resource itself, environmental impacts, social impacts, among other corruption and so on, accidents, sadly. So this has to be kept as low as possible. So these are, let's say, the additional benefits that the current market situation would allow the host country to work for. And now, basically, it's always a one-to-one negotiation between the host country or the owner of the territories, according to the local legislation, and the developer that is coming in to extract. So the agreement will be ruled, first of all, by local legislation. Secondly, by private standards that may be around in the mining sector and that are independent from the local legislation. And thirdly, by international agreements. We don't have so many in that sector. Huh? So also here, being honest and pragmatic, what we can do is apply local legislation fully to the end. For example, making sure that accident preventions, tailings management is done by the state of the art and not in a sloppy way. It can be supported by industrial standard on the tailing management, for example, that I had the honor to co-develop a couple of years ago. In this field, we don't have international agreements. Core for improving to transform this, let's say, positive market situation into concrete advantages is transparency. Having a clear pictures on data, on reports about the activities of the industry there, access to the media, access to the tribunals for affected local community or to claim about deviation from the standard. So, in 2 words, and I come to a close. Global agreements would help. We don't have such agreements in equality today. The Council, the Global Council that is run by the Paris Peace Forum, is arguing together with others that we would need an agreement on these topics to guarantee fair and just conditions to access to resources and the fair benefit sharing. One is working towards that. And the second one, it is transparency through clear data and information. It will take time. We will need to be patient in that journey, but it's a good starting point we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. Thank you also for your frank language. You say it's not a huge benefit, and it's also in a space that is not governed by international agreements, but you still have levers on the ground. So on that note, I would like to pass it on to Louis. Louis, from your OECD perspective, with heightened global interest in strategic metals, how can producer countries work with stakeholders to secure not only economic benefits, but also environmental and social protection? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question and for extending an invitation to the OECD. I think my first bit of response would be to advise producing countries to take their time. Because since 4 or 5 years, there has been a sort of frenzy of development of international discussions, government to government or business to governments, a number of requests, signatures of memorandum of understanding all across the place. So it's probably very difficult for producing countries right now to have a good sense of where their best interests lie. So the first counsel I would give them is really take your time, make sure that you have a good understanding of your own resources, how valuable they are, and who you're talking to as well. Because obviously not everyone is well intended across the world, be they governments or corporates. So pay attention to who you're actually negotiating with. That's number one. Number two is make sure that you have a sound industrial policy in place. So you have resources. Do you know what you want to make of them? How you want to extract them? To how far you want to push your industrial policy agenda? That's very challenging, and you can't really make that up in a couple of months' time. So, and that also requires a number of resources and a solid administration. You can't rush all of that. So, coming back to my first point, take your time. Probably third point, make sure as much as you can to have a sort of national discussion on those issues, engaging with your of course, with your people, with the public opinion, with your local private sector, with all forces of the political economy in your own country, because this is a one opportunity in a lifetime, if you will. So don't spoil it. Again, don't rush into it. And the fourth point would be there is a lot of existing agreements, not necessarily agreements, standards, let's say, around the world, initiatives, either voluntary or mandatory, either government-led or industry-led, that can also, to a certain degree, determine how the country, the producer country, will be able to make the most of our natural resources. So they need to have a good understanding of that as well. They need to acknowledge that they may have some gaps in their own administrations. They can reach out to a number of international partners as well, and they should also make sure that they select the right one, depending on their own profile. So just to sum up, I'd say obviously this is a very challenging area, and this is where the geopolitical angle comes back into play, because there's such a need for those resources, because there's such a rush to secure the access to those resources. The requests are coming in daily, and I can only imagine what it looks like in an administration of a producer country. But I would say this is the responsibility of a government of a producer country to take a step back and really understand where is its best interest. And the final point won't come as much as a surprise for you, but we do work on the notion of responsible investment. So I would urge, again, producer country to not welcome all kind of investments because there is a big risk here of creating, and to some extent it has started already, creating a race to the bottom. That frenzy to secure access has started to create a sort of race to the bottom, and it is the responsibility of producer countries to make sure that they don't feed that rush to race to the bottom. Thank you.
Thanks, Louis, and thank you for taking this strong view and looking at the situation from the producing countries. I think these requirements that you list are actually really, they demand time. To have a solid industrial policy, if you don't have it and you don't have the expertise, as an example, it will take time to build it. But I think that you're very consistently arguing for looking at your self-interest and understanding, especially if so many MOUs are being signed that are more driven also by geopolitical signaling sometimes maybe. Okay. Speaking on geopolitics, if I may just go to the left of Louis to Maha. Maha, as an expert in global risk, how do you see geopolitical rivalries over critical minerals shaping the future economic and political landscape, particularly for mineral producing countries? I know you just flew in from the US, so maybe you will also make other comments, but please give us the geopolitical view on this discussion. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Good to take a break from the US after the recent election results and the months of political turmoil. I wanted to take a couple of minutes to share a few ideas from my books on global risk, but also ideas from my wonderful grad students at NYU, and also highlight one or two reports that I think are worth being aware of. First, what is the perspective through which I'm speaking, my global view? I see the world through the lens of global risk, which explains effectively the chaos that we've experienced in recent years. It's a global legitimacy crisis that effectively reflects the chaos, or rather the decline of the post-Cold War era. So if you're wondering why there's so much unpredictability, it's effectively that. We boil it down to 4 key points: that geopolitically, of course, post-Cold War, we understood that the US was the lead power. It was the hegemon. That has dramatically shifted. Certainly the election result has cemented the end of US leadership. And at least one country, namely China, has vocalized its agenda to be the #1 power, I believe by 2049. Second, post-Cold War, we were told that democracy is the best system. It should be the sole surviving source of political legitimacy, and that was what the US global hegemon promoted around the world. As you know, that is no longer the case. I think democracy has suffered dramatic legitimacy crises, including in the Western developed context. And it's led to the larger question, is democracy the best system, or are we heading for a post-democracy world? Third, post-Cold War, we were told this phase of globalization was going to help everybody. Unfortunately, it's led to rising inequality, as well as the policy alternative of economic nationalism. And lastly, post-Cold War, we were told that that we should all get along. The US hegemon said human rights were important, liberal values should be pursued. Unfortunately, in the last 15 years or so, hate and extremism have found a home online and in real life. So in these 4 key ways, we have seen heightened risk and effectively the end of the post-Cold War era. And as I said, the US election has cemented that shift away from the US hegemony, and that extends to the critical mineral space. So this is the second point. Post-election, we have to start thinking about Trump again and his interesting way of speaking. As I'm sure you heard during the campaign trail, and as he's still saying, he will, to quote him, drill, baby, drill. And I think there's no question in Trump 2.0, he will be focusing more on oil. But I think he also made it clear in his first term, and it'll come up again, he wants to move away from foreign dependence in terms of critical minerals. Apparently, 35 critical minerals he claimed in 2020 were being pursued abroad and from foreign adversaries. So he declared a national emergency in one of his many emergency executive orders. And I think, no question, in addition to focus on fossil fuels, he will be looking to exploit domestic minerals in a way that perhaps Biden didn't do sufficiently. And again, the larger goal is to move away from a dependence on China, who, as we know, is the leader in global supply chain, the global supply chain of critical minerals. I can't imagine he will try to engage with other parts of the world, for instance, Africa, in terms of their critical mineral resources. He didn't even visit Africa during his first term. The last point I want to mention is that we might notice the rise, or we should note the rise of the other in the context of critical minerals. Smaller states have already shown that they are that they have incredible power with respect to their critical minerals. You may have heard of Jared Cohen of Goldman Sachs, who highlighted this in a report recently, Resurgent Resource Nationalism by Geopolitical Swing States. Countries that have a competitive advantage in the global supply chains. And he talks about countries like Zimbabwe that have already banned the export of unprocessed lithium, Chile that's planning to nationalize their lithium sector as well. Indonesia restricting nickel exports. So the smaller state will be more relevant in the global stage in terms of critical minerals. Perhaps we're even in a post-superpower era where these other actors will be more significant as the big powers are burdened with great power competition. And related to that, we should also be aware of the non-state actor, the incredible sway, power of private capital, private funders in the critical mineral space, climate tech, renewable energy. And we can certainly expect in the US context that they will play a bigger role, as Trump has already said he'll remove federal support in some of these renewable energy sectors. So basic point, US post-Cold War era, US hegemony is over. And expect to see the rise of other powers, smaller powers, as well as the non-state actor, the private sector, in driving change in the context of critical minerals. So thank you.
Thank you, Maha. It's great that you're highlighting also that domestic focus that Trump will have, and maybe more than in his first term. On lithium, we may hear later more from Joel. I think that will also be a good example. What I just want to clarify, if you allow me, that the China 2049 goal is not to become the leading power. That would be politically quite, that would be super explicit, and I think they would have to discuss about international order. But it's the second centenary goal of the Chinese Communist Party, and it's about realizing the basic socialist modernization. Just to, if I just may add that to what you have been saying.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah. But there you still have tension in the international order. So I think your point is still valid. Thank you, Maha. If we go to Emily, I would like to ask Emily, given your work at Global Witness on the transition mineral campaign, what are some of the biggest challenges to ensuring that mineral exploitation benefits local communities rather than exacerbating inequalities? And I think this ties back already. Bruno, you started by saying it's actually very small, right? And then Louis was saying you have a race to the bottom. So if you can share from your perspective, thank you so much.
Yeah, so maybe to put that in a little bit of context of where we are at Paris Peace Forum, we're here because we're talking about making a more peaceful, equitable world. And actually, when we look at how the exploitation of minerals for the transition is happening, that's not necessarily the picture that we're seeing. Just this Friday, Global Witness has released a new report which maps where mining for some key transition minerals is taking place against the top 10 countries which are producing them over the last 3 years. And one of the key findings that we found was that depending on the mineral, about 71 to 80% of the mines are being controlled by countries, or they're headquartered in countries which are already developed or are high consumption. And I say that because obviously China is the big player here and they're the high consumption country. But when we looked at where conflicts, violence and protests were taking place around mining sites, 90% of those were taking place in developing countries, which were mineral rich. So clearly when we're talking about value addition here, that's not a value addition for these countries. So that's kind of the base point that we're starting from, and I think that that's really important. I would also like to add that we have a yearly report on the killings of people who are defending the environment, and we discovered that mining was the #1 sector responsible for deaths. So this is a really unequal picture in terms of the countries which are producing and the people who are living nearby. I also wanted to think about how we define value, because I've been in a few different forums where value is really determined just in monetary terms. You know, how much money is the community who are located near or working on the mining sites getting at the end of the process? And a lot of the communities that Global Witness work with don't see value that way, because they also see value in their ecosystem, in their environment, in the ability to farm the land in 10 years' time. And they also see value in their cultural heritage, which is sometimes tied up on the land where this mining is taking place. So first of all, I think we have to take a step back when we're talking about value addition and what that really means. But there's a kind of waterfall of other different types of value addition as well. We are in an unprecedented age, and these minerals are part of an unprecedented push to save us from anthropogenic climate change. And so we need to look at them in a completely different way. And so value addition, when you're a mining company, might be about coming into the community and creating value by also setting up programs for health and investment in education and in infrastructure. And then you're adding value to the community, but you're also adding value to your company overall, because a healthy worker, an educated worker, is a better worker. And clearly this is something that's going to help facilitate access to some of these minerals later on in the supply chain. And then, yes, we talked about what those benefits actually look like, and we talked about access to more of the supply chain, and this also kind of lands us in a bit more of a traditional value addition zone. But I think we also have to think a little bit about what that supply chain looks like as well, because quite a lot of production can be quite dirty and harmful to the environment. And we need to make sure that that value and the thinking around the ESG is really embedded at every part of this, wherever the supply chain and the value is onshored. I think the problems about, to go to your original question about making sure that communities don't bear the brunt, we've heard a little bit from both Bruno and Louis about governance and the issues at the country level, and I think we could spend a whole panel on that as well. But I think it's also really incumbent on us to recognise that there is a fundamental way, an issue with the way that we're thinking about these minerals in a business as usual way, that we're looking at the supply chains and kind of at the moment, the way that business is happening is very business as usual, and it really apes the fossil fuel age. So we extract, we use, and at the moment we dispose, because although the technologies that are built from them are called renewables, there's not a lot of recycling happening right now. We need to be massively investing in the amount of recycling that we're doing, the technology to recycle, to be able to truly call the end product renewables. And the other part of the business as usual way that we're emulating from the fossil fuel stage is that we are trying to get these, and this was also mentioned, at rock bottom prices. And actually we need to be looking at these minerals, which are going to be the key to move us away from our current dependence on fossil fuels as a global commons, and sometimes that means that we're going to need to approach the pricing for them in a very different way. So it may mean that we're looking not at always a race to the bottom financially, but sometimes really thinking about, how we can add value to an entire community by maybe paying more, or maybe setting up some global orders which really determine exactly how we equitably distribute these minerals and the products that are created from them.
So I think you give a couple of viewpoints that definitely tie together with the more economic points from Louis, where you said that you need to take time to actually be clear about your agenda, but then you actually talk about what's the impact on the communities. So thank you for bringing up that perspective. If I may go from Emily to the left to Joel. Joel, and just to recap, you have an investment banking background. So I just want to ask you, from an investment perspective, how do you see the role of venture capital in driving innovations that not only meet global demand for critical minerals, but also align with local value creation and sustainable practices? So a little bit the angle that Emily was also addressing.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. I just landed from Bolivia, so I have...
Je viens d'arriver de la Bolivie, et donc je suis j'ai la tête un peu légère.
I will illustrate this in more a concrete example.
Je vous donne un exemple plus concret de ce que nous faisons et de la philosophie de ce que nous faisons.
And we will see a lot of points of what Bruno and Louis mentioned before. First, we have to understand that when we are going for lithium, for example, we are in South America, we are going to countries mainly with the problems of institutional problems and problems really deep with corruption and low institutionality, and with a population, indigenous population that is very tied to their land and to their culture and the way they perceive their land. So there have been, for example, when I talk about Bolivia, there have been a lot of failed experiments of investing in Bolivia with the lithium starting in the 90s. And what we saw and what was at the origin of our fund is that until you don't take into consideration the populations, local populations, and how they perceive their environment, it will be always the same failure, whatever is the amount of money you put in. And when we started with this conclusion, we went to the mining companies, and the mining companies were very traditional in their viewpoints. So we said, okay, how we can change the perception, how we can change the way those companies perceive the way now, today, in the 21st century, we need to do a different way of mining. So we said with capital. So we create a venture capital company that would be part of this game, but asking those junior mining companies that are willing to enter to South American countries to respect first the local population, the environment, and to fight the corruption practices. So it's a very challenging purpose. It's quite innovative with the funds, but we think this is the north we have to go all together in order to succeed. And so far we are doing some. We had some great success with that. We made a pilot of investing in Bolivia through technological transfer from materials related to battery to the Bolivian people. We foster the creation of students from the Bolivian communities to improve their knowledge about batteries, the recycling of batteries, and also for the best, we send them over France to the CEA. We made this for 3 years and it was very successful. The former president of YLB, which is the state-owned company for lithium, was part of that promotion. So we think it was that successful that the people in the communities perceive the investor and the future partners that will be doing the lithium mining in Bolivia from a different perspective, rather than a traditional extraction company. So we believe this is the thing that is very important to do in terms of a capitalistic actor. Improve the way we perceive the other, the local person, and well, so far there are a lot of challenges, but also for the environment, we started investing in small companies, small startups in Europe and in the US related to water conservation, water treatment. So this is this also is an example where when we invest, we ask the startup to create at one stage of their development some knowledge transfer to the countries where they will operate with their technology, particularly direct lithium extraction technologies, which are key to the lithium extraction from ponds in high altitude.
Thanks, Joel, and thanks also for descending to our lower altitude here and taking this dizziness. I think it's a very, very impressive example of private capital stepping up and trying to along local criteria. So I'll be curious in the second round whether Emily will also react on that, whether you can actually team up with private capital, where you drive with capital requirements, you try to cater to not only financial criteria, right? And on behalf of producing countries, I think it's a very interesting example. So thanks for sharing it. Now to the most left, Christoph. I said peace-building background. I would like to ask you, how do you see the current global power competition for critical minerals affecting local communities in the DRC? Are there specific impacts, positive or negative, that you've witnessed on the ground?
Thank you very much, Marcus, and it's a great pleasure to be on this panel. So generally, I think the global power competition is playing out in the DRC, but this is mainly in the industrial sector. The project that I work on, that Marcus in perfect Swahili already mentioned, is the Madini kwa Amani na Maendeleo project. In English, Minerals for Peace and Development. It works in Eastern DRC. Eastern DRC, there's a lot of conflict, but it's also entirely artisanal mining. So I want to, and I think this will echo what my predecessors already, or many of my predecessors have already said, I want to focus more on the importance of the artisanal sector and advocate for greater focus on the artisanal sector. So the project that I work on mainly works with the government and with stakeholders in the artisanal mining sector to improve governance in artisanal mining through greater transparency, but also through identifying conflict and managing conflict in mining areas. And so the idea is, by improving governance in the artisanal sector, And by improving transparency, you cut some of the links between conflict and minerals that finance or that fund conflict and armed groups. So generally, I think there is definitely the dynamic of the race to the bottom, but this is nothing new. And in the artisanal sector, communities have always borne the brunt of extraction. They are left with very few of the profits or of the benefits. Minerals get taken out quickly. The prices paid to local miners are very, very minimal compared to global markets. And they're left with environmental degradation and after they leave. Because governance capacity is very weak in a country like the Congo, there's very little recourse they have, and this has been like this forever. And great power competition does certainly not improve that. The artisanal economy is usually important for the DRC and the population of the DRC. There are estimates from the World Bank that between 8 million and 12 million people in the Congo depend on revenue from artisanal mining. There might be about 2 million miners or so, and the rest is family members and people that depend on them. So I think if you want to really develop rural areas in the DRC, the focus is not on industrial mining, and revenue sharing I think is great on big mining contracts is important. But if you want to develop like large parts of Eastern Congo, you need to focus on artisanal mining. And then, so what you need to do is you need to, this rush for accessing and controlling minerals is definitely, we perceive that in the DRC as well, that there's less emphasis on respecting international standards, that the emphasis is really on getting there quickly and controlling access. And China has been very good over the years in controlling a large part of that access. And now there's a little bit of a tussle between the other great powers. So what should be done, I think, for artisanal miners is a much greater focus on artisanally sourced minerals. Countries need support and assistance in oversight and in improving the governance of the artisanal sector. So this is something that our project works on. They need capacity support in tracking and tracing mineral productions. And we also need to strengthen civil society to provide a genuine oversight function that the government actually plays its regulatory role that is supposed to. Transparency, I think Bruno mentioned that transparency is really important. There's very little data on artisanal mining, so anything to invest in greater data collection on mining sites, on the mineral production, on the mineral flows from the mining site and the trade routes would be hugely important and would provide for fodder for civil society to actually hold governments to account, and also for governments themselves to have a better grasp of their production. Financing, I think, is also a really important issue. Funding for artisanal mining is very difficult to come by for cooperatives or for small miners. So they mainly rely on investors that are, let's say, in the gray or in the black market. A lot of foreign interests that then extract the mineral and take them through illegal channels, through neighboring countries, or through the Middle East, or through Asia, straight out of the country, and neither local communities nor the government benefits. So I think focusing on these few areas and a greater emphasis on artisanal mining would be my advice.
Thanks, Christoph, for adding the angle of artisanal mining. In my mind, I felt a bit of a tension between what you say and what Louis was talking about in terms of taking time to think through an industrial policy. But I think for artisanal mining, it's just a completely different game. And if you have fast-moving corporations, global corporations, sometimes backed by diplomatic MOUs that give them access, it's probably also from an OECD perspective is a different situation. I will, before going back to the panel, what I would like to do is just take some questions from all the guests that we have. Do we have a microphone? So who has a question? I already see some. Also one question here in the back then, and then a third one there. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chair. It's my pleasure, honor. My question is about the resource country status in global value chain. Just compared to the OPEC countries, that the value or the narratives of the mineral processing or mineral exporting country actually is very, very low in global supply chain. So if they can get the same narratives like OPEC countries, Gulf state countries, they actually can have the resources, enough resources to push the industrialization and the improve the domestic governance. So my question is, if and how can improve this country's status in global value chain? And the second question is about the we talk about green rare earths, green mineral mining industry, also what like the upstream, downstream, and midstream, like China, just the middle stream, and if we talk so much about competition, and can we explore any cooperation for China, US, and their Congress, for we can build the green supply chain together to make a totally maybe for the net zero direction for build a green supply chain for many sectors between China, US, EU, and their resource producing countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for raising the very interesting idea of OPEC. Do you address someone specifically?
I'm Hong Yuan from Shanghai Institute for International Studies, just for the panelists. Thank you.
Yes. Did you address any of the panelists specifically, or the panel can decide themselves? Did you?
Just for all the panelists.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah. Okay. So who wants to tackle this idea of countries rallying together like OPEC countries and having more influence? Who wants to Yes, Joel.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting, important question. I think what will be rather than an OPEC that is very complex to build, different interests, different tendencies between countries, how they see the development and the industrialization. Some with a very nationalistic perspective, others less. It's very complicated. But what we will see at one moment, at one stage, for example, talking about critical minerals for EVs, we'll see a development of clusters of technological innovation and new ways of mining. Cluster developed and recycling, of course. Cluster developed in each region that would start working, based, for example, on the existing infrastructure of cars construction. I take the example for South America. You have a natural markets for EVs as well in South America, and you will find you already have people like Toyota and other car builders that are present in Brazil, in Argentina, and Colombia that are switching their production to EV. That means that in the middle stream you will need to find industrial complex that will manage to create the cells, the batteries, and the chemistry of the cathodic materials.
So I think, Joel, you addressed the second question as well, right? You're basically saying that there's an onshoring of the downstream into these minerals producing countries. I think Emily also wanted to contribute.
I did. I wanted to come in on the second point of Professor Yu's question about green supply chains, because you raised for the first time the end users of these minerals, which we haven't really talked about yet. And Bruno talked a little bit about the rising demand for these minerals. But I think it's really important when we talk about these supply chains, and particularly the products that they're going to produce, that we do talk about reducing the pressure that particularly the global north is putting on these resources. I don't think that we have to accept the figures that have been given to us for the projections of how much minerals extra we're going to need. Because what we've seen so far in the world is that actually the renewables that are coming online are only covering the expanding energy needs of the global north and not actually meeting any of the new energy needs. So there's already a very inequitable distribution of how these supply chains are actually panning out, with most of the end products going to the European and American markets, for example, when we're talking about electric vehicles. So this can't be a green supply chain as long as the supply chain is only ending up in certain markets. We have to see this as in the whole, in the round, as a problem about climate change. And so if, for example, we only manufacture electric vehicles which end up on the European and American markets, where do our combustion engine cars go? They don't just disappear. Do we project that we will just sell them onto the global south, who will gladly take them from us? No, clearly not. They have their own agenda for their own electrification, and we should be thinking about that as we're thinking about the equitable distribution of these minerals, while we also think about reducing the energy needs in the global north, for which for a very long time we've been taking far more than our fair share.
Okay, so not just accepting these forecasted big numbers, and the green supply chains are difficult if you want to build them, especially if you believe you can build them everywhere at the same time. I think, thank you for the question. We have a second question in the back. Can you just identify yourself again? Yeah, thank you.
Can you hear me? Hello, I'm Seamus Porter. I'm a Master's 1 student at Sciences Po. My question is actually financial instrument related, mostly to Joel, but anyone could chime in if they have other, because it's partially private but partially public, because you talked about VC funding. But I'm interested in if you're trying to adopt more, thematic bonds or adopt more other instruments that can sort of like fund the peaceful borrowing from what they've done in green financing into more peace building, whether that be thematic bonds, and what role national governments, banks, multilateral institutions, and even blockchain developers are going to play in that. If you could just speak to that.
I'll be very brief because I want my colleagues also to take a share on that. For us, we are very in the financial approach. We are very standard approach. So we are not using yet those kind of instruments, although we find them very attractive, and we would really like to find a way to get them on the market. Right now, we face, for example, in the financial community, let's say, we're quite an activism. we are very activistic in the perception. We are perceived as very activistic. But who knows? I hope in the very near future we will find more instruments that are going the way that you mentioned. Thank you.
Louis, do you want to add?
Yeah, thank you. That raises the very important question of where do we find the money to invest in those mines. And I think people need to understand that irrespective of what you hear about like everyone's interest in minerals and transition minerals and whatnot, the money is still not there, and that's to a large extent. And I'm not sure it's an issue of what instrument is the private sector willing to use or not. It's just that there's a huge mistrust in a couple of points. A lot of the private sector still don't really see the business case for transition minerals, and that's reflected in the fact that a lot of the exploration funding that's going into mining, most of it's still going into gold, so, which is insane. I mean, not saying that gold is useless, absolutely not. But the private sector and in general, let's say supply chain actors, are investing mostly in gold for the moment. So there's still a lot of education that needs to be done on building a business case for investing in transition minerals. And again, I'm not sure it's an issue of what vehicle, but Jose probably has more on that, of what is the right type of vehicle that the private sector will take. It's just that they don't get it at the moment, that this is coming, and it's going to hurt at some point.
Someone else wanted to add? Financing instrument? Briefly, Christoph?
Yeah, I don't know much about financing instruments, but I think these are all great ideas, and this is exactly what is needed. And maybe global development banks need to set up funds for, for if cooperatives in the DRC had access to clean funding. And this isn't even a lot of funding that they need, but instead of having access to only illegal funds, that would be a huge change maker.
Yes, Joel?
Just a quick observation. You mentioned a word, Louis, mistrust. Is really that. We find a lot of mistrust about critical minerals development with the financial community. I will just give you a quick example. We are in talk with a big fund. I will not mention the name here. A big fund that is doing a lot of green things, solar panels, energy, green energy, etc. But we went to them and said, look, we want to change the perspective of how we do mining in those countries, rich countries with resources, but with a lot of challenges. They said, no, this is too dirty for us. So the mistrust is at different levels.
Thanks for the example. We had a third question there in the back. Thank you. If there's a fourth, please already give me a show of hand.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it's hard without the... thank you all. These are really terrific presentations. I'm Tatiana Karyanis. I'm based at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. And have worked in the DRC for a long time. We've talked a lot about the green energy transition and critical minerals in relation to the green transition, and that the green transition has been driving this competition. You haven't really spoken about the other end users, big tech. And I wanted to ask you how you see these particular private actors that are not really regulated even as end users impacting these supply chains. We're seeing narratives, at least across Africa, at least certainly in DRC, saying, look, you know, we're critical producers of these critical minerals, so we need to have a seat at the table in discussions about AI governance and so on. But they don't have the capacity, whether it's access to compute, to data, or to skills, to produce the, you know, what would elevate them to the next step of the value chain. Could you talk a little bit about how you each see the big tech in this discussion? Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. Who wants to start? Big tech. Bruno?
Yes, but not exclusively big tech. Yeah, so this is elements that will, let's say, level the fields globally are maybe less international body today, where we have started the conversation, but are market forces. There is a pressure on miners and mining countries coming, as we have just said, from the investor side. They don't want to invest there because they say it's dirty. It is dirty, full stop. And pension funds in Europe and insurances, they are not even allowed to invest in these fields. So this is simply, the consequence is, guys, you have to become clean. You have to become sustainable, fair, and just, and then money will be invested. Another one, today probably the strongest pressure on the mining industry are the customers. It is big tech. The example of Apple is well known, but not only them. So car industry that says very clearly, Volkswagen, BMW, we want clean and fair iron. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 indicators. You have to tick this. If not, we don't pass the contract. And of course, by the same price. It is your job to do the work the right way. And these are market forces that today are changing the landscape, and the industry is reacting, is working on global standards of practice that are led by the industry. Convergence work that ICMM and MEC and others are conducting today. On the public side, and this will be my last sentence, on the public side, I would try to underscore what many of the colleagues have said. A key role, and governments on the south. So if we don't want children to work in mining, labor law have to be passed and enforced by local government. If we don't want miner prostitution around artisanal mine sites, we need local government to enforce this law. If we want sound management of tailings, we need local governments that write the laws and enforce that. It is not always possible to put the responsibilities on international bodies. 80% of the responsibility is with the local forces, with the local authorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. I apologize that I had already promised a fourth question. We're actually at the end of the time, but I would like to add 2 minutes and invite just each of the panelists to formulate one takeaway in the sense of what did you learn today, or what do you want to convey on collaboration, just linking to the spirit of the Paris Peace Forum? Maybe I'm looking at Christoph already, you're looking into your laptop, but if you want to start, very brief comments, all the other panelists can already think about their main takeaway. So Christoph, please.
Thank you. No, I think there were lots of great ideas. I cannot pick one particular thing, but certainly there is great mistrust also between governments. Unfortunately, there is already an institution in the Great Lakes region, the ICGLR, the International Conference on the Great Lakes, that has a mandate to regulate mineral trade and natural resource extraction. But there's a lot of smuggling going on between those countries. But maybe strengthen some of those institutions. And also, I'm all for enforcing local laws and standards, but governments have weak capacity, so they need more support to do that.
Thanks, Christoph. Joel?
Well, from my perspective, I think we have to, under this, at this stage where we are with this energy transition, we need to have all the actors involved. I think the people from the capital markets are not a lot of involved in what are the discussions at the UN level, for example, on critical minerals. And I think this is part of the game we need to improve.
Great, thank you, Emily.
I always think it's interesting at things like this to see not where we start on geopolitics, but where the discussion ends up going. And what I noticed from this discussion is that we spent quite a lot of time on capital. And I don't think that that's surprising, actually, because capital is everything. Where the money goes, everything else follows, right? And so if capital eventually goes towards high ESG standards, everything will follow. It's not where we are right now. As we've already discussed and identified, investing in mining is risky. And so quite a lot of the investors who are investing right now are bad faith, or are not necessarily the types of people that you want investing in these quite crucial supply chains. But for me, maybe the most important part of this discussion was when Joel talked about front-loading community consent, and also I will add environmental impact assessments, because if we're going to de-risk mining, to make sure that the investment that's coming into it is much more responsible, then we need to make sure that the output is responsible as well. And the way to do that is to de-risk it by front-loading community consent, free, prior and informed consent, and environmental impact assessments, which, putting that work in up front will make the whole business of mining much less risky and make it much more less likely that we're going to see interruptions from our supply chains, from conflict, from violence, and from protests.
Great. Capital join the discussion. Maha?
Sure, super quick. Again, let's think beyond the superpower to the small power who has realized they have incredible leverage with the critical minerals in their countries. And also let's think of the non-state actor, the incredible power of the policy entrepreneur and different types of investors and funders. I think that will be the game changer of this next era, post-Cold War.
Thank you. So you include capital as well. Louis?
No, just a reminder of how important this discussion is, generating collaboration on the issue of extraction and processing, and making sure that those minerals are accessible to all countries, because ultimately no single country can achieve the transition on its own. So it cannot be about competition. This is one of the only global topics at the moment that truly are about collaboration. At this stage, we're not quite there yet, but we still have to keep trying, because otherwise everyone's going to fail at the end of the day.
That's also the question that you asked earlier. Bruno, final word.
Very different point of views to the same topic, and what it struck me is we don't have actually disagreements. We are looking at different ways to the same challenges, but in a cooperative way. And this is, I guess, give me hope that continuing this conversation will get there what we have to do.
Great, Bruno. So let's scale what you just observed. I just want to mention as a last thing that tomorrow, 2:30 p.m., there's another event hosted by OECD. Actually, Louis is going to be there, and I think multiple of the panelists to continue the discussion on transitional minerals. If you're interested, you can still sign up, or you just walk up to Louis. You can do it right now. I would like to thank everyone for attending this discussion and contributing questions. And then also, please join me in giving an applause to the panelists. Thank you so much.